Let's begin.
Hey there, scary story fanatics, and welcome back to Cleaving Thought from Bone with your host, Sociopathic. I hope tonight you've brought yourself a smile. I know I sure did, and so did Doughboy420. So sit back, relax, and get ready for a very special upload that Doughboy420 likes to call Jeffrey.
My name is Mark Thomas, and I used to be a police officer. I was a rookie back then, and I didn't know what I was in for. I would never forget it. I'm writing this to reveal the story of how I took part in the creation of this monster. I can only ask you, please, listen to my story. It must be known, and it may even help you someday. As I remember, we'd gotten a call about a fight that had gone on across town. Apparently, a kid had beaten a few young men to the point that they needed to be hospitalized. A kid of about 13, named Lou Woods, had been apprehended for the crime and was being questioned by a couple of my superiors, Officer John Roberts and Detective Alan Smith. They had the kid in the interrogation room with his parents, Peter and Margaret Woods, for over an hour, before I was approached by Lou Woods' brother, who was waiting in the lobby just near the desk where I was working. "Hello," he said in a quiet voice. He seemed scared to me. "Hello there," I greeted him. "What's your name?" I asked. Jeff Woods," the boy said in a mild tone. "Hi, Jeff. I'm Officer Thomas." I introduced myself to him. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked. "It was me," Jeff told me. "What was you?" I asked. "It was me that got in a fight with those guys. I beat up Randy, Keith, and Troy. And those jerks had it coming to them, though," Jeff told me. But I'd already been informed by my friends on the case that he had already attempted to cover for his brother, who we believed at the time to be the actual culprit. I wish I'd believed the kid. Maybe I could have helped him. Maybe I could have stopped all this. "I know you didn't do that, Jeff," I informed him. "I'm sorry," Jeff said, before turning and walking back to his chair. I looked back down and went to work. I finished up and went home. Jeff was still sitting there in the lobby when my shift ended. The next day, I heard from my friend John that the kid Lou Woods had gotten sent to a juvenile detention facility up north. I remembered thinking, he's going to be there for a while. After all, one of the kids had a fractured wrist and the other had a cracked cheekbone. He'd really beaten them bad. After a few long days in the hospital, the three boys were well enough to return home and they were released to their parents. Those kids were trouble, and despite their injuries, they continued to be trouble. They wanted revenge against the true culprit of the crime. It was actually Jeff who had hospitalized them. He was protecting his brother Lou, and now Lou was protecting him by taking the fall. During the time of the incident, Lou and Jeff were on their way home from the park near to the school. They were sitting at the bus stop at the edge of town waiting for the bus. The two of them weren't very popular around our little town, since they were new and all, and they only really had each other. They were pretty far from home, on one of the back roads in town, at the bus stop by an old bridge. The three teenagers, Keith, Randy, and Troy, had left the creek below and come up the path that was beside the old bridge that the road crossed. They'd actually harassed Lou and Jeff for a few weeks already, but the two of them had always just cowered away in hopes that they'd be left alone. The boys also tormented many of the other kids around the neighborhood. Those three were bad apples. Keith pulled out a knife from his pocket and forcibly stole Lou's wallet. They pushed him and Jeff around like bullies tend to do, calling them names and threatening them. Normally, the neighborhood kids would just give the three what they wanted, and they went away. But not that day. That day, Jeff had had enough. Jeff took Keith by the wrist and turned his hand around before pushing it back at Keith, causing the kid to stab himself in the stomach and breaking his wrist in the process. Keith didn't expect the attack because Jeff had always complied with them because there was three of them and one of him. The other two boys were shocked that Jeffrey actually stood up to them, so they didn't know what to do. Jeff swung again, this time at Randy, who was still in shock. He took the full force of the punch to the face, which shattered his cheekbone. Troy walked away with a broken rib and a broken finger. He broke his finger trying to fight back against Jeff. I later found out that Jeff was smiling while he did it. Like he enjoyed it. Like he enjoyed hurting them. He put the three of them in the hospital, and he enjoyed it. But now they were out. The three of them were out of the hospital and in some pretty serious pain, but that didn't stop them from wanting to seek revenge. You would think after being beat nearly to death, one would change their ways to keep it from ever happening again, but these kids didn't. They came up with a plan and went through with it. As you all may know, their plan completely backfired. The bullies set out to make Jeff feel the pain that he caused them. They wanted to disfigure him like he'd done to Randy. They wanted to make him pay. They decided to get some gas and some matches and make him suffer. Troy got a can of gas from the shed out back of his house, and Randy always stole his dad's cigarettes and matches to smoke himself or to sell to other teens at school. And Keith brought along a few secrets as well. The three of them skipped school and got together and met under the bridge on the back road, the same bridge that they had crawled out from under when they were beaten by Jeff. But this time, they were ready. The boys waited under that bridge for their plan to spring into action. They knew that Jeff had to cross that bridge after school to get to the bus stop that he took home every day. And sure enough, they were right. They watched as Jeff approached. The three kids waited for him to get to the bridge before they began their ascent up the hill to the road. By the time they had gotten up to the top of the hill, Jeff was already across the bridge, but he didn't stop at the bus stop. Instead, he just kept walking down the road. Jeff had been invited to a birthday party and he was on his way there. The three boys had other plans for Jeff. They ran up to him and two of them grabbed his arms while the other grabbed his legs, one of them holding a hand over his mouth to muffle his screams. They dragged him off, kicking and screaming, into the woods beside the road and back down by the creek where their plan would unfold. No one would hear them there. Once down at the creek, they pushed Jeff into the concrete wall that held up either end of the small bridge, and they kept him there, pinning him against the wall. Two of them held Jeff against the wall, while the third punched him repeatedly in the stomach and groin before throwing a few punches to his face, causing his head to bounce off the concrete behind him. The three of them beat him senseless until they were sure that he wouldn't fight back, or sure that he couldn't fight back. Then they crossed the line. Beating him the way they did was bad enough, but they took it much too far. Jeff was tossed to the ground, but he still had some energy in him. He attempted to flee, but it was when Keith pulled out one of his surprises. He'd stolen his father's gun from the desk in his office, and now he pointed it at Jeff. He froze in terror, not knowing what to do. It was at this time that the other boys began to kick Jeff in the sides until he stopped trying to escape. After he stopped struggling, they went even further, crossing another line. They went from bullying to assault to torture. It was time to put their plan into full action. Troy grabbed the gas can and began to empty its contents over Jeff's head. After the can was emptied, Randy retrieved a book of matches from his pocket, and as he was doing this, Keith pulled out a second surprise. A bottle of bleach.
"What the hell is that for?"
Randy asked Keith.
"You'll see,"
Keith said. What are we gonna do? Clean his hoodie?" Troy asked jokingly. Keith and Randy both laughed.
"No, you'll see, after we light him up," Keith continued.
"We're really gonna do this?" Troy asked.
"This prick put us in the hospital. That's where we're going to put him,"
Randy answered, before he lit up the match and held it above Jeff.
"Drop it,"
Keith said.
"What?" "Drop it,"
he answered. I don't know, Randy answered, unsure of what to do. However, Randy took too long to decide, and the match burned down too close to his fingers, causing him to drop the match. Jeff erupted into flames. He screamed in pain as the fire burned away his skin. He screamed and rolled around on the rocks, trying to put out the fire. It was finally extinguished when he rolled into the creek. Jeff just laid there for a while, the waters cooling his burned skin. Keith, Randy, and Troy were in a bit of shock at what they had done. Keith figured it was too late to go back now, so he unscrewed the cap of the bleach bottle.
"Turn him over,"
Keith commanded to the other two. They complied and turned Jeff over onto his back. He was in shock and was barely breathing.
"Why didn't you just die? Why didn't you just go to sleep?"
Keith asked Jeff, who was shaking in fear and pain.
"It's too late now,"
Keith continued.
"Now you're ugly too,"
he yelled, before pouring the bleach out onto the burnt face of Jeff. Jeff's eyes rolled back in his head as he nearly passed out from the pain. The bleach burned his skin further, causing his flesh to further bubble on top of his already burned skin. The bleach and fire turned his face into a big, leathery, pus-filled bubble. His face was swollen and pale. He now had kind of an ethereal look to him, ghostly white. "What the hell's happening to him?" Troy asked.
"What's it doing to him?"
Randy questioned.
"Chemical burn, too,"
Keith answered. Jeff went silent as he began to convulse from the pain. Then he stopped moving, and the three bullies thought that they had become a trio of murderers. But Jeff was not dead. They weren't that lucky. It was at that time that Jeff jumped to his feet. Without any warning, he tackled Keith to the ground and began biting him. Jeff ripped the flesh from Keith's cheek before grabbing a large stone and bashing his face in.
"You go to sleep!"
he screamed as he beat Keith with the stone until he stopped moving. Keith was dead, and his face was gone. It was now just a bloody mess. Troy and Randy were surprised that Jeff was capable of this after what they'd done to him. Surprised and scared, they ran up through the woods towards the safety of the houses nearby, but Jeff quickly chased after them, only a few steps behind. Troy tripped over a tree root and fell to the ground, allowing Jeff to catch up. Randy stopped for a moment and looked back at Troy as Jeff approached. He probably questioned whether or not he should go back and help his friend. He chose not to. Randy turned and continued dashing up the hill as Jeff jumped onto Troy's back and began to beat his face into the ground. Jeff beat Troy unconscious and broke a few more of his bones, but Jeff left him alive and jumped up to pursue Randy. Jeff seemed to have an unnatural speed to him. Randy was running as fast as he could, but Jeff was able to catch up to him. Randy ran up the hill toward the music and laughter that could be heard up ahead. Randy stumbled out of the woods and into the backyard of the twins' birthday party where he yelled for help. The party stopped and everyone looked to the source of the screams in time to see Jeff emerge from the trees and jump onto Randy's back, knocking him to the ground. The party guests screamed in terror as Jeff beat Randy into the stone patio in the backyard of the house, crushing his face into the stone. He then dragged Randy over to the open grill where they were having a barbecue for the party, cooking burgers and hot dogs, and Jeff used it to cook something else. He threw Randy headfirst onto the grill and closed the lid on top of him, burning his face against the flames and hot metal grates. Randy kicked and screamed for help for a few moments before falling limp and slipping out of the grill. The partygoers screamed, and Randy's charred corpse fell out of the grill and laid on the smoldering patio. All hell broke loose as the people at the party all ran in panic, all fleeing in different directions as Jeff stood over the burned body. Jeff collapsed next to Randy and finally succumbed to the pain of his burns, causing him to pass out from the pain. A few days passed before Jeff opened his eyes again, but when he did, he wasn't in a place he knew. He was in a juvenile criminal hospital. He'd killed 2 people and severely injured a third. No one really knew the true story. Not until later, anyway. Jeff reached up to his face, and he could not feel it. Instead, he felt the cloth of the bandages that covered it. He panicked for a moment before the door to his room swung open, and in stepped his mother, a doctor, his father, and his brother Lou. "Jeffrey!" his mother yelled excitedly before coming over to him to hold his hand. "Where am I?" Jeff asked his mother. "You're in the hospital, Jeff," Mrs. Woods answered. "How you feeling, son?" Jeff's father asked him. I'm okay," Jeff answered. "Good to hear, kid. Good to hear," his father said happily. "Guess what, Jeff?" Lou said to Jeff. "What?" Jeff asked, still kind of confused with the situation. "The doctor said you can take your bandages off today," Lou said. "Wait, how did you get out of juvie?" Jeff asked. They found me not guilty and let me go," Lou said. "Oh," Jeff said, still in a bit of a daze from the sleep and the drugs. "Hello, Jeffrey. I'm Dr. Whitmore." The doctor introduced himself. "Your brother's right. We get to take your bandages off today." Dr. Whitmore finished, speaking in an upbeat tone. "Oh, okay," Jeff said, still not knowing what to make of the situation or what had happened to him. "What happened?" Jeff asked him. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Woods asked her son. "What happened? How did I get here?" Jeff asked in a quiet and confused manner. Lou began to answer, saying, "You beat the crap out of," before he was interrupted by their mom, who said, "We'll talk about it later. Right now, let's take off those bandages." The doctor began to peel away one layer after another from Jeff's face, pulling up cotton bandages and tossing them into the garbage. When the doctor had removed all the bandages, Jeff's parents let out a gasp. Jeff had been permanently scarred. Jeff reached up to touch his face. He felt skin that felt leathery to him, and also soft and spongy, like a balloon. "You don't look so bad, Jeff," Lou said, before Jeff turned and looked in the mirror. His skin was pale and ghostly. His lips were large and puffy, swollen and sore. Many layers of skin had been burned away, and they were now a shiny red color. His hair even appeared darker against his bleached skin, black as night, hanging down to his shoulders. He looked in the mirror. And smiled. "I don't look bad. I look awesome," Jeff said in delight. "What?" his parents asked in shock. "This is great," Jeff said happily before bursting into laughter. The doctor rushed Jeff's family out of the room and into the hall, leaving Jeff laughing hysterically in the hospital room. I'm sorry. I think this medicine's taking effect," the doctor began. "It's a pretty strong dosage," he finished. "Is he going to be okay, doctor?" Mrs. Woods asked. He made it through the worst of it. He seems like he doesn't remember what he did. That's common with people that experience extreme situations, the doctor told them. I wouldn't want to remember that either, Jeff's father said. Will he be all right, though? Lou asked. I can't say for certain right now, but I believe he'll make a great recovery. But I'm afraid that due to the circumstances, we have to keep him here, the doctor told them. We understand, Mrs. Woods said. Jeff's family said their goodbyes to him and left that night to return home, to hopefully get some actual sleep after this horrifying ordeal. But they were not so lucky. They all returned home and went to bed. They had a busy day tomorrow. They had to prepare for Jeff's case. During the night, Mrs. Woods awoke to the sound of crying. The sound was coming from a bathroom down the hall, so she got up from bed, opened the door, and began walking down the hallway to the bathroom. The bathroom light was on, and there were shadows coming from under the door. The sound of crying got louder as she approached it, and soon it sounded more like giggling than crying. Mrs. Woods reached for the handle and opened the bathroom door. Inside, she found Jeffrey standing in front of the bathroom mirror. He was wearing the hoodie that they had brought to the hospital for him, his favorite white hoodie, but it was now soaked in blood, and a small portion of it had turned a dark crimson. She scanned up to his face to see him holding a knife to his mouth. He slowly cut through his cheek, and blood gushed out. He had already cut a wide gash into the other side of his mouth. The cuts that he had made had given him a large grin. Scanning further up to his eyes, she noticed that his eyelids were now gone and had been replaced by a ring of burnt black around each wide open eye. He had burned away his eyelids. "Oh my God! What are you doing?" Jeff's mother asked her son in terror. "Now, I can smile all the time, and I never have to go to sleep, Mommy," Jeff explained. "Don't I look good, Mommy?" he asked her. "Yes," she replied in complete shock. "Go get Daddy, so I can show him too," Jeff told his mother, who quickly turned and ran down the hall to do just that. "Help!" she yelled. "Jeff's gone crazy! He's hurting himself!" she yelled to her husband, who was awoken out of a dead sleep. Jeff's father woke in time to see his son enter the room behind his wife. "Mommy, you lied," Jeff said, before slicing his mother's throat with the same knife that he had used to cut a smile into his face. Mrs. Woods yelled in terror, but was quickly silenced by a series of slashes to the face and neck. Jeff seemed to take a bit more time killing his father. He enjoyed what he was doing. Lou was asleep in his bed during the whole ordeal. He didn't hear a thing, but he was awoken by uneasiness, by the feeling like someone was staring at him. He felt creeped out, and when he opened his eyes, he saw the cold eyes of Jeff staring back at him. Jeff had crawled into the bed with his brother and was watching him sleep, staring directly at his brother's eyes. "Go to sleep," Jeff said, before sinking the knife into his brother's stomach. Lou gasped in shock. He was confused as his brother had tried to kill him after all that they had done together. But this wasn't his brother anymore. This wasn't the Jeff that he knew anymore. This wasn't Jeff, his brother. This was Jeff, the killer. He was now a monster. Jeff tilted his head to the side and watched his brother close his eyes and drift off before leaving him for dead. Lou was lucky to survive the ordeal. It was after that calls started coming into the station. 911 calls of people reporting that a white-faced kid was committing heinous acts of violence against people and property. He started small, breaking a few windows, then he escalated to more messed up stuff, like strangling a poor old woman's dog to death in front of her. A mother called us about him beating her 10-year-old child's face into a tree and breaking out his teeth. We clamored to find this kid, but he just kept popping up all over the place, getting worse and worse as he went along. He beat an old man nearly to death with his own cane. The man later died from heart failure. The crimes continued through the night, and police were sent out left and right to look for this kid, but he just kept going. No one knew where he would strike next. He used a tool that was used against him to set local businesses on fire, razing the building to the ground. He seemed unstoppable. Then he began killing others. First, a couple walking down the road were stabbed to death and left on the road. A car stopped to help the couple, and Jeff killed the driver too, stabbing him to death and leaving him in the pile on top of the other two people. Jeff stole the man's car and was involved in a hit and run of an elderly man. It was chaotic that night as one call after another kept rolling in. All different cases, but all the same perpetrator. A boy in a white hooded sweatshirt with a pale white face, a big red smile, and long black hair. It was Jeff. He was killing everyone that he came into contact with. More calls came in, and more and more. A woman was set on fire, a man beat to death, a kid bludgeoned with an aluminum baseball bat, an elderly woman stabbed, an African-American woman cut into pieces, an Asian man crushed to death by a car. Jeff just kept going. He just kept killing and laughing while he did it. I was called to a home on the west side of town where a man had been chased into his home by a man wielding an axe. The man said that he'd already witnessed this guy decapitating another person before he turned and charged after him with the axe in the air. The 911 operator could hear the door being hacked down in the background, so there was no telling what to expect when we got there. I didn't know if the man would be alright or if he'd been hacked into tiny pieces. When I got to the house, I found the door wide open, and a large hole had been chopped out of the door. Blood could be seen inside, and beyond the blood, there was the body it originated from. The man was already dead. It was too late to save him. I got out of my cruiser and began to investigate the house. Jeff couldn't have gotten far. I was only a minute or two away when the call came in from 911 from the man who was now laying deceased near to the front door of his home. I walked up the brick walkway toward the open doorway, drew my gun and held it, pointed toward the ground, as I slowly walked further. The door slowly swung open as I pushed it with my hand. It slid silently over the living room carpet inside. Inside the house, I found another body. The man's wife was laying dead in the kitchen with a knife still sticking out of her chest. She, too, was laying in a pool of crimson. Upstairs, I heard the sounds of a children's show playing on the TV. Oh no, I thought, as I slowly ascended the stairs. Please no, I thought, as I walked further onward up the stairs. At the top of the steps, I seen that one of the doors to my left was ajar, and the sound of a children's show was coming from within. I feared the worst as I approached the door. It was at that time that I heard giggling from within the room. I felt a sigh of relief, realizing the child was still alive. I pushed the door open and peered inside. My heart stopped when I looked. And there he was, standing over the crib of a small toddler, peeking up over the side, playing peekaboo with the child. "Peekaboo," Jeff said, paying no mind to my intrusion. "Jeffrey," I said. "Peekaboo," Jeff said again, ignoring me and causing the child to burst into laughter before poking his head back down behind the side of the crib. It was at that time I seen the glint of light reflecting from within Jeff's left hand. He was holding a knife at the side of the crib, waiting to strike at any moment. "Put the knife down, Jeff," I told him. "Peekaboo." Jeff jumped up again from behind the crib, again causing the kid to laugh, and again ignoring me. "Jeff, put it down," I commanded again. At that time, Jeff finally acknowledged my presence and slowly turned his head to face me. He looked at me with that terrifying, ghostly smile. His smile said happy, but the look in his eyes lacked any emotion. He was gone. Jeff's soul was gone and was now replaced with something else. "Go to sleep, little baby," Jeff said as he turned back to the child and drew his arm back, knife in hand. "No!" I screamed as I tackled Jeff to the floor. The baby erupted into a fit of tears as Jeff and I wrestled on the floor. I kept screaming for Jeff to stop resisting, but he just grunted at me and continued fighting. After a few moments, I felt a sharp, cold pain in my right side. Then, I felt a warm wetness. I looked down to find the knife sticking out of me. I looked up at Jeff and into his eyes, and he peered back into mine. I seen the blackness in his eyes, the emptiness in him, the darkness that had replaced his soul. Then, I just saw darkness as I passed out from the shock. I awoke the next day in the hospital with federal agents standing over me. Jeff had escaped, and they needed answers. Is the baby okay?" I asked them, still half out of it. He's quite all right. If Officer Roberts hadn't gotten there in time, neither of you would be here now," the agent told me. I relaxed back against the bed, knowing that I had at least saved one innocent life. But I couldn't stop Jeff. I let him escape. Jeff was still out there, somewhere, watching and waiting.
Well, they say that when you smile, everybody smiles with you. And if you can't smile, just carve one into your face. And don't forget to carve yourself a path right back here again next weekend for more gore galore. And until then, remember to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can catch you all again next Saturday.
Social media can be very unpredictable, especially regarding horror content. If this content gets removed, all new content will be simultaneously presented on various websites provided in the description to this video. Make sure to follow me in other digital spaces so that you never miss out on the terror. Also, if you like this video, make sure to leave a comment and hit the like button. It helps the channel a lot. If you're new to the channel and you enjoy what's here, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Writing is a dream of mine, and it's all of you that make that dream come true.